human beings have a capacity to do something that no other creature, including all of the highly intelligent social creatures that we know of, can do. And that is to pass abstractions from one individual to another. And what that does to us is it changes our evolutionary nature in a way that I think mirrors the distinction that you're drawing. Because what we describe in our book under the heading of campfire is that human beings can take, let's say that your tribe finds itself either with the failure of the niche that it inherited from its ancestors or having moved across space in a way that that niche is no longer applicable, right? You've gone from being a coastal people to an inland people, and you're no longer gathering shellfish. You have to find some other way to feed yourselves. The way that problem is solved, we believe, is that people gather, we think, at campfire when our eyes are no longer capable of allowing us to be productive out in the world. We gather around campfire and we take the amazing cognitive and perceptual machinery that we have, and we pool our resources. We parallel process problems asymmetrically. Everybody around the campfire has different strengths and weaknesses. And by putting something into the common space, we can take the puzzle. You know, I saw a creature. I do not know how we're going to get one, but I have reason to think it's edible and that it would be worth our time. You take that puzzle and you put it into the common space, and people process it independently, asymmetrically, and pool their understanding, which allows human beings as a living instantiation of lineage to have capacity that far exceeds the sum total of the capacity of each of the individuals. So we have an emergent capacity that is leaps and bounds greater than we as individuals pooled together could do if we could not exchange abstractions, and then any other creature that does amazing things in the world, be it wolves or orcas or whatever it might be, anything that they might be able to do. And so the reason that that becomes the story that you're telling is that once you have the ability to divide up a puzzle by handing over the abstraction to the other members of your tribe, and then parallel process and put the sum total back together and find hopefully the foothill of some new niche that you can climb and discover the full dimension of, that once you can do that, you need consciousness. So our argument in the book is that our consciousness is fundamentally collective first, and that individual consciousness has been overly focused upon because our individual consciousness is so much more vivid than our collective consciousness. Because I can tap into my own consciousness, I'm very convinced that it exists. And if I think about the consciousness between people that I know, I don't know if I'm speaking in metaphor because I can't look at it.
Mm-hmm. Vygotsky, the Russian linguist, developmental linguist, had an idea that was parallel to that.
Great.
So, yeah.
So,
but and obviously we use words to think with, and the words are collective constructions.
So that's the key. Once you have built the architecture that allows you to have a collective consciousness in which you can share a puzzle, what you now have is the ability to take that same toolkit and play the game with yourself.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly right.
And so once you can do that and you can play the same game with yourself, well, now it gets elaborated. And the idea that I can be of two minds about something, and I can actually argue both sides of the thing to try to figure out which thing I'm more compelled by, that's a pretty special trick.
That's for sure, man.
To be able to have an argument with yourself.
I think that's why Christ says that you're supposed to love your enemies. I think the reason for that fundamentally is that if you can practice that, you can take the perspective that's most antithetical to yours, which is where the revolutionary significance might lie, and you can give it a fair shake and separate the wheat from the chaff, right? And you can't do that if you demonize everything that's not you, right? You have to presume that in the antagonism to you, there's something that can be radically gained. Yeah. Maybe that's the reason there's an adversary in existence per se.
So that's really an argument for a compassionate theory of mind. And one of the things, who knows how much has been lost in translation, of course, But one of the things about the story of Jesus that I think is fascinating, just from an evolutionary point of view, is that what Jesus is effectively arguing in many different places, in the story of the Good Samaritan, in the Sermon on the Mount, the Golden Rule, he is arguing for a broadening of the concept of self, right? The in-group is getting larger as a result of this. And what you're suggesting about the paradox of love your enemy actually has an interesting outgrowth, which is if you do that, if you take all of the people that you're not supposed to get along with and you make the attempt to feel things as they do, not even just understand how they feel, but to actually extend compassion to them. Some of them, you shouldn't do that. And I'm sure Jesus would say something different, but you shouldn't really do that with a psychopath because they're going to use it to parasitize you. But for many people who you might initially think are your antagonist, if you consider that they might possibly actually be a collaborator, you will end up enlarging the number of people who are actually on your team. And so if I can just
yes, definitely
complete the story here, I think one of the reasons that Christianity took on such a dominant position in the world is because this message of broaden your in-group is a perfect match for the age of exploration. And that
right.
If you're on a landscape where the environment is zero-sum and you are fighting over resources that are already all known, then it doesn't make sense to radically in-group because somebody's not going to eat. On the other hand, if what you are doing is adopting a larger and larger piece of territory, the key is actually not fighting when you could make profit from an environment that doesn't fight back. But also, and this is interesting, the Old Testament is not a book of monogamy, and the New Testament is. And here's why that seems to fit this whole model. The mating system that allows a population to grow at the maximum rate, if it's humans, is monogamy. And the reason is because human babies are so expensive to raise that bringing all capable adults into the process of contributing to the raising of children elevates the number of viable children that get produced per generation. So you go from an ancient, brutal world to a world in which your tendency towards violence drops and your tendency towards monogamy and investment in offspring goes up by virtue of the fact that all men are brought in on that process. And that fits the moment in history perfectly so that that idea spreads vertically, right? It does spread horizontally, but vertically. As that population that believes these things is spreading out across the world, it's taking over territory, and the idea is spreading